The wind that afternoon seemed to carry ancient secrets, as if the air itself hesitated before touching the ground of Ashford Hills. The cobblestone streets shone with a faint sheen after a light drizzle, reflecting fragments of a silver sky that still hadn't decided whether it wanted to awaken or fall asleep for good. There was something in that light, a kind of silent sigh that wrapped itself around everything. It was in this setting that Hannah walked, with steps that didn't fully belong to the world around her. She used to say her heart was like a house with its windows always slightly open, one breeze of hope drifting in, another of sorrow drifting out. Maybe it was because of her humble upbringing, a childhood marked by small absences and large silences. Or maybe it was simply the way she saw life, with a gentle melancholy that never quite let her go. Hannah came from a neighborhood where Sundays smelled like reheated coffee, and the early morning hours were dedicated to promises most people never managed to keep. Still, she carried a quiet strength, the kind born from learning early how to survive uncertainty. Her job at the old Ashford Hills library was her anchor, not out of passion, but out of necessity. Yet every book she touched seemed to whisper stories that reminded her of everything she had yet to live. And that day, something inside her felt as if fate was about to move an invisible piece. The library sat at the crest of a gentle hill, surrounded by tall oak trees whose leaves creaked like ancient guardians. It wasn't a modern place. On the contrary, it carried the aura of a nearly forgotten past. The scent of aged paper mixed with polished wood created a sort of silent temple where even a sigh felt like a small event. Hannah had just finished organizing a stack of old letters when she noticed movement near the main window, a faint flicker, as if someone were hesitating before stepping inside. She lifted her gaze and, for a moment, saw only light. Then the silhouette of a man took shape, outlined by the soft glow of late afternoon. He entered as though he didn't want to disturb the air around him. His name, she would learn later, was David Lancaster, a surname that sounded heavy with history, old privilege, and expectations that followed people for generations. But in that first moment, he was simply a stranger in a dark suit that contrasted with the library's antiquated charm. There was something in his eyes, a restrained restlessness, something that suggested he was hiding windows of his own. He walked through the corridors with a careful gaze, almost wary, as if searching for something he knew he wouldn't find on any shelf. Hannah watched him for a few seconds, trying to decipher him. The way he touched books without opening them. The way he inhaled deeply, as if the air here was easier to breathe than the air outside. And then their eyes met. It lasted only a moment, but moments are sometimes enough to alter the entire course of a life. "Can I help you?" Hannah asked, her voice soft in the way she always used when trying to hide her own curiosity. David hesitated for a brief second, as if the question reached him more deeply than she intended. "Honestly, I'm not sure what I'm looking for." The way he said it sounded different, as if he were revealing more than he meant to. As if it were a truth he carried beyond books, beyond the library, beyond that quiet afternoon. Hannah felt the air shift between them, almost imperceptibly. Something pulled her toward him, not physically, but emotionally, like a delicate thread stretching taut long before anyone could see it. She offered a small smile. Sometimes that's how the best discoveries happen. David returned a brief, careful smile, the kind of smile someone gives when it doesn't come easily. Still, in his eyes there was a shadow, an old secret, a weight he was trying to hide. As they walked together between the shelves, Hannah felt something she didn't have a name for. A sensation of impossible familiarity, a kind of recognition that shouldn't exist. As though, somewhere deep in memory, she had been waiting for this encounter without knowing it. And in that shared silence, something delicate began to form. A quiet beginning, but an inevitable one. A breeze drifted through the window at that exact moment, whispering the same phrase that would echo through their entire story. Some loves are born in the shadows, long before they know they exist. And when David finally stopped in front of her, looking at her as if trying to read a page no one else had ever managed to decipher, Hannah knew their meeting was not ordinary. But she had no idea how much it would change, and she certainly wasn't prepared for what was coming next. The days that followed moved with a quiet, almost hesitant rhythm, as if Ashford Hills itself sensed something beginning to unfold between Hannah and David, something fragile, something not meant for open daylight just yet. It started with small things, The way he lingered near the entrance of the library before stepping inside, or how her hands always slowed just a little when she knew he was watching her sort the shelves. There was no declaration, no sudden spark, only subtle shifts in the air between them. And sometimes, those are the most dangerous. David began visiting the library regularly, though he never brought back the books he checked out. Instead, he returned himself, his presence steady, quiet, but unmistakably drawn to her. Hannah tried to tell herself it was only politeness, curiosity, maybe even coincidence. Yet every time he approached her desk, something in her chest tightened with that same impossible familiarity she had felt the first day. He stood straighter than most people, as if carrying responsibilities invisible to everyone but him. And when he spoke, he always paused before answering, as if measuring the space between what he felt and what he was allowed to say. Hannah noticed everything, how his hands trembled slightly when he brushed dust from an old volume, how his gaze drifted to the window when he didn't want her to see he was troubled, how he softened, almost imperceptibly, whenever their conversations drifted into personal territory. One afternoon, as she placed a stack of books on a table, David stepped closer, not too close, just enough for her to feel the warmth of his presence. "You always look like you're somewhere else," he murmured, eyes tracing her expression. She froze for a moment. "Is that a bad thing?" "No," he said quietly. "It's rare." Her breath caught, just slightly. There were moments when neither of them said a word, and yet something passed between them, something weighty enough to be felt but not heavy enough to be denied. It lived in the silence, in the pauses, in the soft shifting of their attention toward each other. A feeling without a name. And feelings without names often grow faster than the ones we understand. The more they talked, the more the contrast between their worlds slipped into the spaces of their conversations. Hannah spoke of simple routines, of a life shaped by necessity and quiet. Endurance. David, however, revealed little. Not out of arrogance, she never sensed that, but out of caution. He carried an unspoken truth, a boundary he never mentioned yet never crossed. Once, when she joked lightly about him being mysterious, he grew still. "There are things I can't escape," he said softly. And she felt it, the warning tucked inside the confession. Something about him was tethered to a life far beyond hers. Still, something grew. It grew in the accidental brushing of hands when they reached for the same book, in the slight lowering of his voice when he asked how her day had been, in the way she found herself waiting for his footsteps before she even heard them. One evening, just before closing, David remained seated at a corner table, his fingers tracing the edges of an old poetry collection. The library lights cast a warm glow across his face, softening the shadows under his eyes. "Do you ever feel," he whispered, not looking up, "like you're standing on the edge of something you shouldn't want?" Her heart stumbled. "Yes," Hannah replied, her voice barely more than breath. He lifted his gaze slowly, as if the truth might break if handled too quickly. "I feel that when I'm here." The words hung in the air between them, delicate, impossible, undeniable. A single phrase echoed through Hannah's mind. Some loves are born in the shadows. And she knew, with an ache that felt both sweet and terrifying, that theirs was one of them. Yet the world outside the library was not made of shadows. It had rules, expectations, lines drawn long before either of them existed. Hannah didn't know the details, but she felt the weight of them every time David's expression turned distant, every time he looked as though he were searching for the right to stay a little longer, and every time he failed to find it. The tension grew slowly, like dusk creeping across a horizon. And Hannah, despite her softness, sensed a storm coming. It arrived in the form of a voice, not David's, but one she had never heard before. Late one afternoon, while she arranged books behind the desk, the front door creaked open. A tall woman stepped inside, elegant in a way Hannah could never imitate, with sharp eyes that scanned the room as though it belonged to her. She stopped when she saw David across the library. "David," the woman said, her tone firm and familiar. "Your father's expecting you. You shouldn't be here." Hannah felt the ground shift beneath her. David stood, the muscles in his jaw tightening. "Charlotte, not now." But Charlotte didn't leave. She looked at Hannah with a single, assessing glance, one that spoke of worlds Hannah would never be invited into. And in that moment, Hannah understood. David Lancaster did not belong to the shadows. He belonged to a world that would never allow her into the light. The realization settled between them, heavy and undeniable, and something fragile inside her cracked, not loudly but unmistakably. In the days that followed Charlotte's abrupt appearance, the quiet rhythm between Hannah and David fractured in a way neither of them knew how to mend. The library, once a sanctuary, once a place where silence felt soft, now carried a tension that clung to the air like dust unsettled from forgotten shelves. David still came, but there was a weight in his posture, a restraint that hadn't existed before. And Hannah felt it, every shift, every hesitation. She had always known their worlds were different, but now the contrast felt sharp enough to cut. David tried to explain, at first in fragments, then in half-finished sentences that dissolved under the pressure of what he wasn't allowed to say. He spoke of responsibilities, obligations, expectations. He mentioned his family's influence, their presence in every corner of his life, the expectations tied to the Lancaster name. But he never said what Hannah most needed to hear. He never said she mattered enough to fight for. And silence, sometimes, is louder than any confession. One evening, the sky outside the library bruised itself in violets and grays as Hannah locked the front door. She turned to find David standing behind her, his expression full of a conflict he couldn't hide anymore. "Hannah," he whispered, "I didn't want you to find out like that." She swallowed, steadying her breath. "Who is she?" "Charlotte." He looked away. "Someone my family trusts. Someone they expect me to rely on." There it was, the confirmation without the details. The truth without the kindness. A subtle pain pressed against Hannah's ribs. "You should have told me," she said softly. "I know. Why didn't you?" His silence was an answer. A feeling she had never asked for began to unravel inside her. She wanted to turn away, to shield herself from the ache building in her chest. But David stepped closer as if pulled by a force he no longer understood. "Hannah, I never meant to hurt you," he said. "You don't owe me anything," she interrupted, though her voice trembled. "We barely know each other." "That's not true." "Then what are we?" Her question hung in the air like a candle flame struggling against wind. David closed his eyes for a moment, as though searching for something he wasn't allowed to choose. "We're something I can't risk." The words broke something inside her. Not loudly, just enough. In the days after, David stopped coming. At first, Hannah told herself he needed space. Then, she wondered if his absence was a kindness he didn't know how else to offer. Eventually, she stopped wondering at all. A kind of numbness settled in her, slow and quiet, like winter creeping under a doorframe. The library returned to its usual calm, but it no longer felt like a refuge. It felt like a reminder of him, of possibility, of everything she had started to feel without meaning to. The turning point arrived unexpectedly, on a morning washed in pale sunlight, when the world outside seemed gentler than Hannah felt. She was shelving a stack of return books when she overheard two women speaking near the entrance, their voices hushed but sharp with gossip. "The Lancaster family. Big announcement soon. Charlotte's been seen at every event. Looks like the arrangement is finally happening." An arrangement. The word struck her with quiet finality, like a door closing. She didn't move for several seconds. When she finally turned toward the window, the light felt harsher than before, too bright, too honest. Some loves are born in the shadows, but some are destroyed by the light. Later that afternoon, David appeared again, but not with the softness she remembered. He looked hollowed out, as though sleep had become a stranger and choices were pressing in on him from every direction. "We need to talk," he said, voice raw. Hannah didn't trust her own. "About the arrangement?" His eyes widened with guilt. "You heard." She nodded. He exhaled, the breath shaky. "It's not what you think." "Then tell me what it is." Her voice was gentle, but the strength beneath it startled even her. David's throat tightened. "My family decided a long time ago. Charlotte, she's part of a future they've already built." "And you?" she asked. "What future do you want?" The silence that followed was devastating. Not empty. Full of fear, duty, and a longing he wasn't brave enough to claim. "Please don't make me choose," he whispered. The plea shattered what little was left holding Hannah together. "David," she said, tears barely contained. "I'm not asking you to choose me. I'm asking you to choose yourself." A tear slid down his cheek, not dramatic, not loud, just painfully human. "I don't know how," he answered. And there it was, the truth that hurt more than any lie could have. Something inside Hannah broke open, quiet and final. She took a small step back, her breath trembling. "Then maybe," she said softly, "this is where our paths end." David's face went pale, as if the air had been pulled from him. "Hannah!" But she turned away, not because she didn't feel anything, but because she felt too much. The distance between them stretched, and with it came the unmistakable collapse of something that had barely begun. A soft, devastating fall. A love born in shadows, slipping back into them. And neither of them knew if it would ever find its way out again. The days after their breaking point unfolded in muted colors, as if the world around Ashford Hills had dimmed itself out of respect for what had been lost. Hannah moved through the library like a shadow of herself, completing tasks with quiet precision, but without the gentle warmth that once lived in her every movement. The whispers of customers, the rustle of turning pages, even the hum of the old radiator felt distant, like sounds traveling through water. And yet, beneath her calm exterior, something restless stirred. A question she couldn't silence. What truth had David been unable to speak? She found part of the answer unexpectedly. It came in the form of a letter, an envelope left on the front desk early one morning before she arrived. There was no name written on it, only the imprint of an unfamiliar seal, a crest with 2 lions and the initial L carved between them. The Lancaster crest. Inside was a single sheet of elegant paper, the handwriting clean and practiced. "Miss Carter, this association between you and my son must end. David carries responsibilities beyond personal whims or sentiment. Our family's name is bound to expectations that cannot be compromised by distractions. Respectfully, Adrian Lancaster." Hannah felt her knees weaken. She gripped the letter, so tightly that the edges bent under her fingers. Distraction. The word stung worse than any insult could. She reread the letter twice before gently folding it, each movement deliberate, as if the carefulness could protect her from the hurt spreading beneath her ribs. But it didn't. What hurt was not the warning itself. It was the realization that David had been fighting battles she couldn't see. Battles he had tried, however imperfectly, to shield her from. Later that afternoon, as storm clouds gathered over the hill, the library door swung open with a force that startled her. David stood there, rein at his shoulders, breath unsteady as if he had run the whole way. "Hannah," he said, voice raw, "did you read it?" She didn't have to ask what he meant. "Yes." He closed his eyes, a visible crack in his composure. "I didn't want you to see that. I didn't even know he would." "It doesn't matter," she interrupted softly. "It only confirmed what was already clear." David stepped toward her, desperation evident in every line of his face. "No, you don't understand. This isn't about class or appearances. It's about control. My father, he expects obedience. Everything in my life has been arranged and decided for me long before I had the chance to want anything else." "And Charlotte?" she asked. He hesitated, but only for a breath. "An alliance. Purely strategic. Our families planned it years ago. Hannah, I never loved her." The honesty in his voice trembled, fragile but undeniable. Something inside her softened, but something also held firm. "Then why didn't you tell me?" she whispered. "Because telling you meant admitting I wanted something I wasn't allowed to want." He looked at her with a pain she hadn't seen before. "You." The word hung between them. Undeniable. Heavy. True. A silence settled around them, dense, trembling with things neither knew how to say. The storm outside pressed against the windows, a low rumble echoing in the distance like the sky itself was wrestling with the same turmoil. Hannah drew in a slow breath. "David, wanting something isn't wrong. But hurting someone because you're afraid of wanting it, that's different." He lowered his head, shame flickering across his features. "I know. You pulled me close," she went on, voice steady despite the ache, "and then pushed me away the moment your world felt threatened. You made me feel something, then made me feel foolish for feeling it." David's eyes lifted, filled with regret. "You were never foolish. I was. I didn't know how to fight back. I've spent my entire life choosing duty over myself. I didn't realize I'd lose the one thing that felt like mine. A quiet beat passed. Is that what I am? She asked softly. Something you own? His expression broke. No. You're something I found. The vulnerability in his words struck her, deep, sincere, unexpected. For the first time since their fracture, hope flickered between them. Small, uncertain, but real. David stepped closer, carefully, as though approaching a wounded creature he feared might run. Hannah, he breathed, I want to choose differently. I want to choose something for myself. For once. She felt the truth in him, trembling and imperfect, but growing stronger with every word. Still, her heart was cautious. And what happens, she asked, when choosing me costs you everything else? He didn't flinch. He didn't look away. That's the choice I have to make, he said. Not you. For a moment, neither moved. The storm's shadow dimmed the room, but the air between them carried a brightness untouched by the thunder outside. Then, slowly, Hannah exhaled, a release of tension she had carried for too long. Then start by being honest, she said. Completely. David nodded, the gesture heavy with promise. I will. A long pause. Then, almost hesitantly, he reached for her hand, not fully, just enough for his fingertips to graze hers. A touch that wasn't a claim, but an apology. And a beginning. A small flame amid the wreckage. A single step toward something that might still be saved. Dawn arrived softly, as if afraid to disturb the fragile balance holding the world together. Light seeped into the quiet corners of Jane's apartment, brushing against her skin with the gentleness of a confession. For the first time in weeks, she didn't flinch at the morning. She let the warmth settle over her, filling the hollow spaces grief had carved. She had made her choice. Or maybe the choice had been waiting for her all along, patient in its certainty. Love asks for truth. The old leitmotif returned like a familiar heartbeat, echoing in her ribs. Her footsteps carried her back to the place where their story had been woven and torn. The Upper East Side breathed its usual arrogance, polished cars gliding like sleek predators, doormen straightening at attention, the city shimmering with its curated perfection. She didn't belong here. She never had, but today she walked with a steadiness that surprised even her. Because this time, she wasn't coming as the outsider. She was coming as the woman who finally knew her worth. Inside the foyer, the marble floor mirrored her reflection. Tired, yes, but no longer breaking. She breathed in the familiar scent of lilies the housekeeper always kept by the staircase. She remembered dusting their petals, always careful not to disturb what wasn't hers. But today, nothing felt borrowed. She heard him before she saw him. A quiet inhale, sharp, disbelieving. When she turned, David was standing at the end of the corridor, his shoulders pulled tight as if bracing for impact. His eyes held the weight of sleepless nights, of apologies rehearsed in silence, of hope he didn't dare voice. Hannah, he whispered. Her name, spoken softly, reverently, felt like coming home. She didn't run to him. She didn't turn away either. She simply stood still, letting the truth fill the space between them. He stepped closer, each move hesitant, as though approaching someone sacred. I wanted to tell you everything. I tried, but I kept thinking I'd lose you if I did. You lost me anyway, she said, not bitterly, just honestly. His breath trembled. I know. Silence stretched, tender and raw. The kind of silence that asks for courage. I grew up being told to protect my world, David said quietly. My family, our reputation, our decisions were always public before they were personal. And I let that fear shape how I treated you. Hannah's eyes softened, but she didn't rescue him from the truth. He swallowed hard. But loving you, that was the first thing in my life that ever felt real. I didn't know how to hold it without breaking it. A truth lay bare, a confession trembling at the edge of forgiveness. Hannah's voice was gentle. You didn't break me, David. You just made me forget who I was for a moment. He closed his eyes as if the words both wounded and healed him. Then, she stepped closer. His breath hitched, a quiet, beautiful sound. I can't promise, she said, that choosing you won't hurt again. I can't promise the world won't try to pull us apart, or that we won't let our differences bruise us. Her eyes lifted to meet his with unwavering clarity. But I can promise that love shouldn't be built on fear. David's voice cracked. Then let me rebuild it on truth. The leitmotif pulsed between them. Love asks for truth. A single tear slipped down his cheek, silent, unashamed. She reached out, wiping it with the back of her fingers. The softness of the gesture undid him completely. He took her hand, clasped it, held it like something he'd been starving for. This time, he said, we walk forward together. No secrets, no shadows. Hannah felt something loosen inside her, an old knot of doubt coming undone. She nodded, slow and steady, letting the moment anchor her. Outside, the morning brightened, the air shimmering with the delicate promise of something new. Not perfect, not easy, but true. They walked toward the front door hand in hand, leaving behind the ghosts that had lingered in every corner of that house, leaving behind the wounds that had once felt fatal. On the sidewalk, the city unfurled before them, wide, uncertain, alive. Hannah looked at David, sunlight catching in his hair like a quiet blessing. He looked at her as if she were the first honest thing he'd ever known. And for the first time, the world didn't feel divided into theirs and hers. It felt like something they could build, slowly, carefully, fearlessly. She squeezed his hand. He squeezed back. A new beginning, tender in its bravery. Love asks for truth, she thought again. And this time, truth answered. She turned her face toward the rising sun, letting it warm her with the brilliance of what they had reclaimed. And the story that once fractured them finally set them free.